Welcome to our last video on understanding the user. This is video 3, where we'll talk about some objective methods for understanding the user experience and talk about some cases where the user goals and the design goals or the stakeholder goals might not match. Objective methods are the methods where the user isn't telling you what their experience is. You're just observing it or using methods to try and gauge that objectively. So the subjective methods are the ones where the user's voice, the user's discussion, the user's conversation, the user is telling you, and so it's really their subjective experience. A lot of what is subjective about that is their interpretation and their perceptions and their beliefs. When you're doing these objective methods, you're putting your own spin on it. You're not asking the user to give you their perceptions or beliefs. You're putting your own spin on it by what you can observe and what you can see. So, as you might expect, naturalistic observations are an important potential way to do this. This just means observing the user in his or her context. That would be the context that's appropriate for design. So if you're designing a tool for workplace use, you could go and observe the user in the workplace and watch them on a typical day, what they do, how they interact with others, what tools they use. You would just be trying to follow and either take notes or record what's going on so that you have really objective information. You actually see these things. It's not the user telling you what's going to happen, you're watching it in action. Typically you do this for just a specific period of time, probably not even an entire day, but to try and figure out what period of time in the context of use would be most relevant to your design. So it might be a certain time if you're doing a collaborative meeting tool. Maybe you would go watch the user engage in their meetings that day, but not sit there and work at their desk all day. So you try and find a specific period of time that encompasses the full use that's relevant to your design, but not lots of additional usage that's not relevant. You do want to have the range of tasks undertaken during that period of time that would be relevant to your design. So if your meeting tool is both for collaboration in real time as well as to support better tracking of emails of long projects and to do a better job in setting deadlines for projects, then you'd want to look at and do observations that are associated with all of those tasks, not just one of them. You often are taking notes. So these are qualitative, so you're writing down what you see and trying to write down as much information as you can. If you can, video is always better than notes because it will capture more information, but video can be somewhat uncomfortable for the user. So at the minimum, you're taking qualitative notes. People also sometimes engage in reconstructive reflection, and that means that you are recording the user in their naturalistic situation, so engaged in their job or engaged in their task that's relevant to your design. And then later what you do is show them the video and ask them questions. They comment and explain what they're doing as they watch themselves engage in the behaviors in the video. That might include them if it's a system that they're interacting with hands-on, or it could just be a screen recording of them engaging in a task, say, if it's something they're engaging with online or on screen. In terms of naturalistic observations, sometimes it's really important to create situations that allow you to observe what the participants would do in a situation that's relevant to you, and to really observe also what they bring with them to the situation. So if you're bringing them to an interview, for example, you might want to observe everything that they bring with them. And you might want to create a situation where they need to use or do the thing that you're most interested in. So for example, if someone were interviewing me or came to observe me in my workplace and wanted to see how I would take notes, and they would maybe create a situation where they asked me to take a note on something, what I'd do is whip out my phone and take a picture of it. I rarely write things down anymore. I normally take a picture on my phone, and I think this is actually a pretty common experience. So if somebody was trying to devise an app to help me make notes or take notes, I might actually not sort of think about the fact that I hardly ever take notes anymore. I might try and help them and give them some advice, But really, what I mainly need is something that helps me organize and track those pictures I'm taking, not that something that helps me type in or write down items. Another good example of this is something like car design. So car designers who are trying to figure out what kinds of features you need in your car, what kind of storage systems you need, how you use your car, what kinds of things you keep in it. They will bring people in for these individual user interviews like we talked about in our last video. But one of the things that they find most helpful, even beyond what people say, is going out to the parking lot and peeking in and taking pictures of the state of people's cars as they've come to the interview. So they might find that they have bungee cords strapping balls of water to the side of the door. They might find that they have no good place to put trash. They might find that their water bottles didn't fit in the cup holders. So they really take that into account and look at what's working and not working realistically for these people in their own cars as they stand now. So don't underestimate the value of naturalistic observation, and be creative in how you think about going about it with your participants. Another objective method that's especially useful is one that we often term show and tell. And this means that we'd like you to demonstrate how you're using current tools. You often start with a prompt like, can you show me how you'd do this or that with whatever you'd normally use? Or how do you normally? And then ask people to walk you through the process with whatever tools they would normally use. This allows you to really understand not just how they think they accomplish tasks, but how they do accomplish tasks. Another thing to do is to look at their current work products and then to engage in some reflection and question with them. A work product might be anything from a report, a set of notes, it might be pictures that they've taken, or it might be a presentation. Any kind of thing that would be a work product relevant to the design that you're pursuing would be useful here. This show and tell method can help people overcome what we've talked about before, this expert blind spot. And that is, once you become an expert and you have knowledge structures and knowledge organization that supports deep understanding in your area, you very much become unaware of the processes, strategies, or steps in thinking that allow you to understand things or allow you to accomplish goals or tasks in your area of expertise. So having an expert or someone who's very practiced in a task do this show and tell will give you some very useful information about steps or processes or thinking patterns that they may not even be aware of as they engage in using tools, systems, apps, etc. Show and tell works really well in conjunction with interviews. You don't need to feel as if you need to pick one or the other. So as you're engaging in an interview and you find out the kinds of things that people are doing and the kinds of tools they're using, asking them to walk you through how they use those, especially at the end of the interview, can be a great way to get the best of both worlds. It also can help you identify some existing tools and competitors for external review that you may not have been aware of. People might be using things that weren't on your radar. And so this is a great way to identify those so that you can learn from them and analyze them. You always want to be better than what you're competing with. Another objective method is data mining. So if you're working with a stakeholder or you have access to things like institutional data, these could be things like sales patterns, attendance patterns, absentee rates, any kind of thing where they're tracking information, tracking data. These may be very useful to you to understand more about the overall structure, the overall pattern, and to understand whether or not the experience of the people that you can talk to and can observe is consistent with larger patterns that might be at play. In terms of educational systems or medical systems or things where we're tracking a lot of step-by-step, you may have log data that you can use to understand how people go about tasks, the order in which they pursue things. And if you're working with websites or things like that, you might consider whether Google Analytics are being used or could be used during the time that you're doing your design and research to understand what kinds of patterns you see. It's very important to be aware that you don't want to mistake causal patterns from descriptive or correlational data. So you might say, wow, sales patterns really have a dip in this month, so employees aren't motivated then. Well, it could be that that's January and there's a post-Christmas holiday pause in sort of people's buying patterns. It may not have to do with the sales partners as much as consumers. Or you might see absentee rates that correlate with poor weather and think that it has something to do with your employees not wanting to come in when it's raining, when in reality maybe public transportation is more likely to be difficult to get or to break down on those dates. So be careful that you don't assume a causal pattern when all you have is correlational data, so you might not know why it's happening. One thing to consider as we're getting to the end of our lesson on user experience is whether or not the user is always right. In some ways, a user is always right, because if they reject your solution or your design and don't use it, you won't really have met your goal. However, it's always important to realize that your user goals and your stakeholder goals might not always align. So for example, a learner might prize speed, but a teacher might prize accuracy. The employer might prize efficiency, but the employee might prize quality over their speed in getting their tasks done. The user might want no barriers whatsoever in using a system, whereas a developer might realize that there's important security features that really have to impact the user experience. How do you deal with these? Well, one thing to think about is whether you can accomplish the stakeholder goals or any really important needs like security features in a way that won't anger or greatly inconvenience the user. Is there a way to make that as painless as possible but still present? Is there flexibility in the stakeholder approach given their goals? So what kinds of security features are they willing to consider and which are they not? Will better communication potentially solve some of the challenges? And I'll give you an example of this next, where there's a security feature that is somewhat annoying, but since I've learned about its purpose, I've been much more patient with it. And that's with CAPTCHA. So we all have seen CAPTCHA, I'm sure. So you have a sort of distorted series of letters and numbers that are used to validate you as a human. So I've linked here and on the next slide to a TED Talk by Louis van Aan about designing massive scale online collaboration. It's a very good talk and a very interesting one. What I'd like you to do when you watch is to think about what was the design challenge and the design goal. How did they change over time and what were unexpected outcomes of the design? And how to make good designs even better. So your video will start like this. And he's going to talk about something called reCAPTCHA. And reCAPTCHA is very interesting because it's a security feature that is pretty annoying to people, but once we understand the purpose of it, I think it makes us more patient with it. So if I had not known what reCAPTCHA was trying to do, and I see these two words, one of which for me is completely unintelligible, I might find it a lot more annoying than when I know what the purpose of reCAPTCHA actually is. Watch the TED Talk to find out. All right, so that ends our online lesson for this week. I want you to be able to go forth and understand your users. Don't forget to complete your human-computer interaction exercise on interview questions and the reading and Canvas discussion. Have a great week.